Welcome back with me, Melissa Ong. The Prime Minister tabled Malaysia's largest ever financial plan on Friday, Budget 2026. It's a massive blueprint aimed at transforming our economy, narrowing the fiscal deficit and tackling the cost of living. We need to know what this budget truly means for our future. Now, joining me now to break down the numbers and the economic road ahead is economist Dr. Geoffrey Williams, founder and director of Williams Business Consultancy, Sdn Bhd. I'd like to begin with this. What is your overall assessment of Budget 2026? Has the Prime Minister successfully balanced the immediate needs of the rakyat with the long-term goal of fiscal discipline? Dr. Geoffrey.
I would say that actually the main focus of the budget on Friday was a final phase, so to speak, in the housekeeping of the fiscal position, that is to clean up the overall fiscal policy in terms of revenues and in terms of spending. It applied a great deal of fiscal discipline. It was really very conservative, although it is touted as being the largest budget at 470 billion ringgit. There is a big chunk of that which is coming from the GLICs, the GLCs, and the statutory bodies. So actually, this budget is smaller than was planned for 2025. And that shows actually a real turning point, in my view, in terms of fiscal policy, the fiscal policy process, because it means that the government is able to do more with less. And that's a consequence of the government having focused since its election on cutting wastage, cutting leakages, and cutting corruption. And we're now seeing the benefits of that in terms of this budget, where we're getting a very good, very conservative, well-managed fiscal policy, which will lay the foundation, I hope, next year for us to see very much more in terms of policies for the rakyat.
Now, the budget is the first under the 13 Malaysia plan with huge allocations for high-growth, high-value sectors like semiconductors, AI, and also energy transition. Are these investments enough to structurally transform Malaysia's economy and ultimately attract significant FDI?
I think the 13th Malaysia Plan in these key areas is important, but actually these are areas which are better run and better managed by the market, by private businesses. The government has a role in what we call crowding in private investment, which is to say the government will stimulate activity across the areas that you mentioned, AI, green economy, and so on, in the hope that that will attract private investment, both from domestic sources, the government-linked investment corporations, in particular, the GLCs and the statutory bodies. But then we also hope that it will encourage foreign direct investment. But as a general rule, these are areas where the government will play a role in setting the agenda and then providing the seed funding to crowd in private sector investments. And that's really something that we're seeing in the budget, whereas with the government's development expenditure allocation for this budget is really relatively low in recent terms. It's about 71 billion ringgit, and there's a significant amount of 50 billion ringgit, which is coming from government investment sources. And that's good because it's handing over that development expenditure into the business sector, and that will be in the form of domestic investment, foreign investment, and public-private initiatives.
How realistic then is the government's plan to meet its projected revenue target for 2026, especially since no new broad-based taxes were introduced? Now, will the focus on enhanced enforcement like e-invoicing and the new carbon tax truly broaden the tax base?
Well, the projections are across most sources of tax, that is income tax and corporation tax, and even in excise duties, that there will be organic growth across all areas. And we also have to remember that this year, 2025, there was an SST, and that increased revenue during 2025, and it will increase revenue again during 2026. So it isn't unexpected that there wouldn't be any tax changes or particular tax changes in the current budget because we already had the tax hike for SST. Overall revenue is expected to be higher for next year than this year. And the only real concern in terms of revenue is the revenue from Petronas, which has the projection has been cut by 12 billion, from around 32 billion down to about 20 billion. That's the only real concern. But that's more affected by international factors, market factors in terms of oil prices, and also the restructuring, the right sizing policy that Petronas is undertaking. But overall revenue is strong. But it isn't necessary actually for the government to push for higher revenue in terms of taxes, because they are saving money, 15.5 billion ringgit in terms of subsidy rationalization, which is a very large amount of money. And over the last 2 years, they have saved the same amount, 15.5 billion ringgit, through anti-corruption policies and recovering losses from practices. So it's that type of cleaning up of the system that is giving the government more fiscal headroom, and that means they don't have to rely on higher taxes.
Now let's talk about the government's shift towards targeted subsidies alongside expanding cash aid for vulnerable segments in our society. Now, in your opinion, what are the economic risks and benefits of this targeted approach, particularly regarding managing inflation and public debt?
I don't think there's any particular inflationary risk in terms of the rationalization of the subsidies, because this is simply a reallocation of the money. There isn't any additional money, it's just being reallocated. And the government's forecast for inflation for next year is that it won't go above 2%. And I think that's probably about right. Inflation this year is likely between 1.5% and 2%, and probably it will be the same for next year also. So I don't see any particular inflationary consequences of these subsidy rationalization changes. And in terms of the cost of living, the handouts through STR SARA are the same for 2026 as they are for 2025. And so there's no particular increase in that allocation. So again, there would be no particular inflationary issue there.
Thanks for the clarification. Let's talk about the property sector, which saw changes, including a higher stamp duty for foreign buyers. What is the expected economic trade-off here? Will it make housing more affordable for locals, or will it dampen a vital source of foreign capital? Your thoughts on this?
Actually, the property market's rather segmented. And for foreign buyers, we've always had a higher minimum purchase requirement for foreign buyers. So whatever is done in terms of the arrangements for foreign buyers and stamp duty for foreign buyers, it doesn't really have much of an effect on housing affordability for locals. Generally speaking, people should not be worried about these issues in terms of the change in stamp duty for foreigners. It won't necessarily have a detrimental effect on the market for locals.
Now, finally, what is the one key takeaway or most important number from the budget that will define the upcoming year?
I would say the fact that the government has been able to put in a lower overall spending target, and at the same time has been able to increase the allocations across the main priorities of health, education, and social protection. And what that's showing is that the general narrative that the government should tax more in order to spend more has been broken. The government does not need to tax more in order to spend more. The government simply needs to crack down on wastage, leakages, and corruption, and then it will get the revenue and the fiscal space that it needs. And I think the biggest number that I was impressed by was the 15.5 billion ringgit in recovered money from corrupt practices. That shows that the crackdown on corruption is working. And the second most important figure is the same number. It's 15.5 billion from subsidy rationalization. And that shows that by being more efficient, the government has more money to spend on priorities for the Rakyat. Those are the two big numbers.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for weighing your perspectives. Dr. Jeffrey, we'll see you again.
Okay, thank you.